I thought I was just a tutor, but that student taught me to live my truth. I should have known at the moment he walked in wearing eyeliner, Doc Martens, and a Harvard hoodie like it was some inside joke. But what really wrecked me was the way he looked at me like he already knew everything I was trying to hide. They told me this job would be simple. Just help the boy with his essays, Mrs. Lansing had said, her voice syrupy over the phone. He's a little behind, but he's bright. Talented. A bit. Unique. Unique. Right. I'd tutored enough rich kids in Manhattan to know what that meant: rebellious, probably queer, definitely exhausted from parents who preferred performances over personhood. I took the job anyway. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed something. After 38 years of living half a life, you start clinging to anything that smells like purpose. My name is Nathan Caldwell. I was an English major turned nobody, turned private tutor for the children of America's elite. I lived alone. Ate alone. Went to bed each night with a book and a hollow in my chest I'd long accepted as permanent. Until him. Until Eli. He opened the door on our first session, not a butler, not a parent. Him. 18 years old, tall, messy hair dyed silver at the ends, and a smile like he'd already read my diary. "You must be Mr. Caldwell," he said, cocking an eyebrow. "You look like someone who's never broken a rule in his life." He wasn't wrong. I nodded stiffly. "You must be Eli. May I come in?" He stepped aside, still smiling. "Welcome to the house of emotional damage." It should have ended there. But it didn't. Because Eli wasn't just a student. He was a storm. He challenged everything I said, not cruelly, not childishly, but like someone desperate to pull truth out of the world before it collapsed on him. He wrote essays like manifestos, raw and bleeding. He quoted Audre Lorde, Oscar Wilde, and trans TikTokers in the same breath. He made me laugh. Then he made me question why I hadn't laughed like that in years. We met 3 times a week, always in the music room of his parents' penthouse. Eli hated their office. "Too many ghosts," he said once. And I noticed, every time, he played the piano before we started. Not anything classical, no, he played like he was exorcising something. Half jazz, half chaos. I never asked. He never explained. Until week 4. "That piece you always play before we start," I said, setting my laptop down. "What is it?" He shrugged, not looking up. "It's not a piece. It's me, trying not to explode." Something shifted in me then. The part that had been locked up since college. Since Paul. "I used to play," I said quietly. He turned to me, eyes wide. "No way. Seriously?" "Yeah. Long time ago. You should show me." "I shouldn't," I replied too quickly. My hands, traitors, were already itching. "It's been years." He didn't push. Just nodded. "Okay." But something in that look said he knew I'd play eventually. And I hated that he was right. It was 2 days later when I caved. He'd left the room to get us coffee, a ritual he insisted on, and I sat at the piano, fingers trembling. I played something small, simple. Something Paul used to hum when we laid in bed and pretended the world couldn't find us. When I looked up, Eli was there. Watching. "I knew it," he said. "There's a whole version of you no one gets to see, isn't there?" I swallowed. "It's not like that." "Sure it is." He stepped closer, carefully, like I was some frightened animal. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Depends. Are you like me?" There it was. The question I'd spent a lifetime walking around. I looked away. "That's not appropriate." He laughed, not cruel, just sad. "You're almost 40 and still scared of the word gay, huh?" I stood up sharply. That's enough, Eli. But he didn't back down. Why? You think I haven't heard worse? I've been called a freak since I was 11. Do you know how many teachers refused to use my pronouns before I finally gave up asking? I stared at him, breath caught. I'm not trying to out you, Mr. Caldwell, he said more gently. I see you. And I don't want you to drown alone. After that, I should have quit. But I didn't. Because Eli was the only person in 20 years who'd seen through me and didn't look away. And I couldn't look away from him either. The next weeks blurred into something I both dreaded and craved. He'd talk about queer love and literature and I'd pretend I was only listening academically. He'd make jokes about boys he liked, and I'd smile too tightly, afraid of how much I related. One day, I asked, "Does your family know?" He scoffed. They know what they choose to know. My mom still introduces me as her artistic son with eccentric views. I frowned. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. I've learned to build my own mirror. One that reflects who I actually am. Then he looked at me, really looked, and said, "What about you?" I couldn't answer. I just stared at the floor, wishing I had half his bravery. 2 months in, it happened. He showed me a poem he wrote. It wasn't for an assignment. It was for me. For the man who lives behind closed doors. Who still plays lullabies for ghosts. Who taught me how to spell restraint. And forget what it feels like to be kissed. I choked reading it. And when I looked up, he was watching again. Quiet. Patient. You make me want to be honest, I whispered. And I don't know how to do that. He smiled, and for once, it wasn't teasing. I'll teach you. Eli didn't try to kiss me. He didn't touch me. He just stayed, like the idea of him was enough to start melting the decades I'd frozen inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, replaying every moment from the past 8 weeks. Every smile, every challenge he'd thrown my way, every truth he'd pulled from my silence like music from a stubborn key. I stared at my reflection in the window. My hair was graying at the sides. My skin, tired. And yet my heart was awake in a way I hadn't let it be since I was 20. I opened my laptop and started typing. Confessions from the second chair, what my student taught me about being a coward. It wasn't meant to be published. It wasn't even meant to be read. But it was the first time in my life I wrote something not for a paycheck, or a grade, or a masked excuse to stay invisible. I wrote about Paul, the boy I loved in college. How we fell in love in hushed dorm rooms and behind library shelves. How he begged me to come out with him. And how I didn't. I wrote about the day he left, the letter he wrote, and the way I folded it into a book I never read again. And then, I wrote about Eli, about his fire, his honesty, and the way he walked into my life like a mirror I wasn't ready to look into. The next time I saw him, I brought the essay. Read this, I said, sliding it across the table. He didn't say a word until he finished. Then he looked at me with tears in his eyes. You were in love, he whispered. I nodded. You never got to say goodbye. No, I said. I didn't. Eli reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. His fingers were warm, steady. Then say it now, he said. After that day, things changed. He started showing up early to our sessions. Sometimes we didn't even study. We talked. Played music. Read poetry out loud. He brought in his favorite queer authors. I brought mine, closeted, coded ones who broke my heart with what they couldn't say. One night, Eli asked, "Do you believe in soulmates?" I smirked. That's a big question for an essay tutor. I'm serious. I hesitated. I used to. Before I learned how afraid people are of who they really are. What about now? I thought of the poem he wrote. The way his laugh echoed through his parents' cold, gold-plated apartment. The way he never let a lie sit too long between us. I believe in people who wake you up, I said. Even if they don't stay. Eli was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, I'm not going anywhere, Nathan. It was the first time he used my name. It felt like someone had kicked the floor out from under me and I didn't fall. I floated. Of course, nothing that pure stays hidden forever. It started with a voicemail. Mrs. Lansing's voice was clipped, icy. Mr. Caldwell, I'm concerned about the amount of time you've been spending with Eli outside of designated sessions. I'd like to discuss this. Immediately. I called her back that night. She didn't answer. The next day, Eli was different. His usual spark was gone. His hoodie sleeves were pulled over his hands. He wouldn't look me in the eye. They're making me see a new tutor, he said, voice flat. What? Why? They think I'm getting too attached. My throat dried. Did you say anything to them? No. But they read my journal. My stomach turned. They had no right. They don't care, he said bitterly. They want a son they can show off, not one who writes poetry to older men and dreams of kissing boys on fire escapes. I reached out, but he flinched. They think you manipulated me. I sat back, stunned. I didn't. I know, he said quickly. I know that. But they don't want to know. It's easier to blame you than admit they never saw who I was. His hands were shaking. I don't want to stop seeing you, he whispered. I can't. I wanted to say, me neither. I wanted to say, I'd fight for you. I wanted to say, I love you. But I said none of it. Because I was still a coward. Still the man Paul left behind. Maybe this is for the best, I said. His head snapped up. His eyes burned. No. Don't do that. Don't shrink again. I don't want to make things harder for you. You're not, he snapped. They are. And if you let them take this from us. There is no us, I said, too harshly. There can't be. You're 18. I'm 38. This is already a mess. The silence between us was loud enough to crush everything we'd built. Eli stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just looked at me like I was the saddest story he'd ever read. You always told me to write my truth, he said. You just never said you were too afraid to live yours. And then he walked out. I didn't hear from him for weeks. I kept tutoring other kids. Wrote essays for strangers. Sat at the piano and didn't touch the keys. I didn't eat much. Didn't sleep. The ghost of Eli's presence haunted every corner of my apartment. Then, one evening, a letter came in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Eli. Nathan. I hated you for a while. I think you knew that. But then I realized I wasn't really mad at you. I was mad that you let them win. I was mad that the bravest person I'd ever met still thought he wasn't allowed to be whole. You don't owe me anything. But I need you to know you didn't hurt me. You woke me up. You showed me that love doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it's messier. Quieter. Sometimes it's just someone holding your gaze and saying, I see you. And I see you, Nathan. Even if you're still learning to see yourself. Always. Eli. I cried. Hard. Not for losing him. But for never giving myself the chance to keep him. That night, I opened the piano again. Played the same song he always played, the messy, jazzed up chaos he never named. And then I added something to it. A resolve. A coda. A goodbye. Or maybe, a beginning. 3 months passed. Winter bled into spring. New York warmed up, but I didn't. I thought time would dull the ache, but it didn't. Because losing Eli wasn't like losing a person. It was like losing color. I went through the motions. Wake up. Coffee. Tutor. Sleep. Repeat. I ignored the piano. I ignored the ache. Until one Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring. It buzzed again. This time, a text. Hey. I know I shouldn't be reaching out. But there's a showcase at my school tonight. Senior project. I'm performing something. I'd like you to hear it. If you want. If you can. No pressure. E. I stared at the screen for a long time. I knew the smart thing would be to stay away. But smart had never made me feel alive. That night, I stood in the back of an auditorium filled with Manhattan's most polished and plastic. Parents in pearl necklaces and Prada shoes. Chaperones checking clipboards. And Eli, walking on stage in a simple black shirt and silver earring, holding a single sheet of music in his hand. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight ahead as if he were staring down a tunnel of time, and daring it to blink first. Then he sat at the piano. And played. It started slow. Familiar. My breath caught it was his song. The one I'd heard in fragments every week, the one he refused to name. But this version was different. It had structure now. A beginning. A break. A build. A melody that wrestled with itself like it was trying to choose between fear and freedom. Then came the part one didn't expect. He began to sing. His voice was raw. Clear. Vulnerable. You were the silence in my chaos. The note I couldn't find. You were the truth I whispered. In the dark corners of my mind. People in the crowd shifted. Some confused. Some curious. But I didn't move. I couldn't. You taught me how to hold a mirror. Though yours stayed on the shelf. And now I know that sometimes love is teaching someone to love themselves. His voice cracked not from weakness, but from courage. When he finished, the room was silent. A beat. Then another. Then the applause came, tentative at first. Then louder. But I didn't clap. I just stood there, stunned. Because for the first time in months, I felt the hollowness in me crack open and something warm rushed in. I waited by the exit, not sure if he'd come. And when he did, when he saw me, he stopped. He didn't smile. He didn't run into my arms like some movie ending. He just said, "You came." I nodded. I had to. Eli looked older somehow. Not in age. In energy. In truth. You did something I never could, I said. You told the world who you were. With no apologies. He tilted his head. So why are you still apologizing to yourself? I swallowed. Because it's all I've ever known. He stepped closer. Then learned something new. With me. I exhaled. I can't be what you need, Eli. I'm not 20. I'm not brave. I'm still figuring things out. He nodded. I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm asking you not to run. I looked down. And if I mess it up? He smiled softly. Then we'll fix it. Together. That night, we walked through the city. Not touching. Not rushing. Just breathing. He told me about his college plans: Columbia, early admission, music and creative writing. "I want to write plays," he said. "About people like us. Who don't die at the end. Who get to stay." I laughed. "That's a low bar." "It's a bar worth raising." Then he asked, "What about you? What do you want?" It took me a moment. But then the words came, not rehearsed. Not safe. "I want to stop surviving. And start living." Eli reached out, gently. "I'd like to be part of that." So we walked. Not as student and teacher. Not as fantasy and regret. But as two souls trying to rewrite a story we both thought was over. The months that followed weren't perfect. We argued. About boundaries. About fear. About how the world would see us. I worried about perception. About judgment. About the gap between his youth and my shame. But Eli never let me stay in the shadows. He pulled me out, over and over again. With his laughter. His fury. His refusal to let the world shrink us. He moved into his dorm that fall. I helped carry his keyboard up 5 flights of stairs. He kissed me on the rooftop that night, under the glow of city lights and courage. We didn't label it. Not at first. It wasn't a romance, not in the traditional sense. It was a rebuilding. A recognition. A healing. I stopped tutoring. Started teaching real teaching. Queer literature, poetry, memoir. I came out to my sister. Then my parents. Then my publisher. Each time, it got easier. Not painless. But clearer. Eli and I stayed connected. Letters. Messages. Occasional visits. He sent me drafts of his plays. I sent him my essays. We challenged each other. Still argued. Still cared. One night, a year after our reconnection, I opened my inbox to find a message with no subject. Inside was a single link. A YouTube video. Title, The Mirror Boy, a new play by Elijah Lansing. I clicked. And watched. A story about a teenage boy who falls in love with a closeted teacher. Who writes him poems. Who challenges him to break free. Who doesn't end up with him, not in the romantic sense. But who watches him, years later, from the back of a lecture hall, as the man finally stands before a crowd and says, "I wasted half my life being half of myself. But someone once taught me that truth isn't about timing, it's about courage. And I'm done being afraid." The audience in the video stood. Clapped. I sat at my desk and wept. Because it was fiction. And it was real. And it was ours. 6 years later, I sat in the audience of a packed off-Broadway theater. The marquee outside read, "The Mirror Boy," written and directed by Elijah Lansing. The boy, no, the man now, was 24. And me? I was 44, a published memoirist, a professor, and for the first time in my life a man who no longer flinched at his own reflection. I hadn't seen Eli in person for almost a year. We kept in touch, of course, phone calls, video chats, emails filled with drafts and laughter and the occasional, "I miss you." But something had shifted, gently and mutually. We had become more than lovers, and less than partners, something transcendent of both. We were witnesses to each other's transformation. We were history. Living, breathing history. I sat in the third row, heart pounding as the lights dimmed. The play began. Different cast. New staging. Same story. The teenage boy on stage, this version named Milo, was electric. Sharp-witted. Tender. Unapologetically queer. And the older tutor, Mr. Ainsley, was quiet, burdened, and beautifully restrained until he wasn't. The final scene mirrored our final conversation in that auditorium, almost word for word. Milo, you told me to write my truth. You just never said you were too afraid to live yours. Ainsley, I'm still learning. Milo, then learn with me. The lights faded to black. The audience erupted into applause. And I sat there, stunned, as Eli walked onto the stage to take his bow. He spotted me immediately. That old knowing smile cracked across his face. And this time, I smiled back, not with guilt, not with longing. With pride. With love. With peace. We met backstage later that night. He hugged me without hesitation, and it felt like coming home. You changed the ending, I said, pulling back. Eli smirked. You think so? In your version, they stay close. Stay in each other's lives. Isn't that what we did? I nodded. It is. He offered me a seat, poured us each a drink. The dressing room smelled of sweat, makeup, and old books. Somehow, it suited him perfectly. You ever regret it? I asked, softly. Which part? All of it. Eli leaned back, thoughtful. I regret that you had to live so long without being seen. But I don't regret us. Not for a second. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Even though it wasn't what people would call normal. Normal's boring, he said. We weren't perfect. But we were honest. Eventually. He smiled, tired and kind. You once told me you didn't know how to be brave. But you showed up. You chose to keep showing up for yourself. For your truth. For me. That's more than most people ever do. We sat in silence for a while, sipping slowly. Finally, I said, so what now? Another play? Another boy with a broken compass and too many poems in his pocket? Eli laughed. Maybe. But I think I've told our story enough. What comes next, then? He looked at me, and this time, it wasn't with defiance, or sadness, or need. It was with something deeper. Simpler. Joy, he said. And I believed him. Later that night, walking back through the dim streets of the village, I passed a bookstore. In the window was a familiar cover. The Second Chair, a memoir by Nathan Caldwell. Below it, a quote from a review. A haunting, luminous account of queer shame, intergenerational courage, and the redemptive power of unexpected connection. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was proud of the book. But because I remembered the man who wrote it alone, afraid, convinced no one would ever really know him. And now. Now I was known. Not by everyone. But by someone who mattered. The final time I saw Eli, at least, in that chapter of our story, was on the High Line. Spring again. The air thick with possibility. He'd invited me to meet his new partner. A playwright from Chicago named Luis. They were good together. I could see it instantly. Luis was warm, a little nerdy, completely smitten. Eli held his hand without flinching. And I felt nothing but joy. After Luis left to take a call, Eli turned to me and asked, "You okay?" I smiled. "I am. Really?" He nodded. "I still love you, you know. Just not like before." "I know," I said. "Me too." And it was true. Because love had never been the problem. Fear was. And we'd both chosen to walk through it. Together, once. Apart, now. But never alone. It's been 10 years. I teach a class called Queer Narratives in American Literature. The first assignment I give is always the same. Write the story you were too afraid to live. Then start living it. Some of my students are shy. Some are loud. Some are still figuring it all out. I see bits of Eli in every one of them. And sometimes, late at night, I still play his song on the piano. But now, I don't stop at the painful parts. Now, I play it through to the end. Because once, I thought I was just a tutor. But that student, he taught me how to live. How to stay. How to be seen. And how to finally, love the man I'd always been too afraid to be. The end.